If she had stayed silent, if she had just accepted a world that erased her people, an entire empire would have continued its reign, untouched, and history would never have known her name. Because revolutions are not born in comfort. They are born in anger. And the woman who turned that anger into a rebellion shook the foundations of Ethiopia to its very core. Her name was Queen Gudit, rebel queen who rose from the margins and challenged one of Africa's oldest and most powerful empires. This is the story they tried to erase. For centuries, the Aksumite Empire ruled over the Ethiopian highlands. Imagine a kingdom of immense power and wealth, a hub of trade that connected Africa to the Mediterranean and the East. The kings of Aksum were titans of their time, controlling vast trade routes, commanding armies, and enforcing a strict Christian orthodoxy. They built incredible monuments, like the towering obelisks of Aksum, symbols of their divine right to rule. The empire was a beacon of civilization, deeply religious and seemingly unshakable. But beneath this glittering surface, not everyone prospered. In fact, many suffered. The Aksumite rulers enforced their faith and their culture with an iron fist. Entire communities, particularly those who held on to their pre-Christian traditional beliefs, were pushed to the fringes of society. They were deemed outsiders, their beliefs suppressed, their voices silenced. Their land was often taken, their customs scorned. For generations, this created a silent, simmering resentment. A deep well of anger was filling up, drop by drop, in the shadows of the great monuments. And it was from this silence, from this exclusion, that our story's hero or anti-hero, depending on who you ask, emerges. Gudit did not come from the royal court. She was unborn into the lineage of kings, who traced their ancestry back to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. She was a product of the margins. Most historians believe she belonged to one of the subjugated groups, possibly the Aga people, whose traditional way of life was being systematically erased by the Aksumite state. She witnessed firsthand what it meant to have your identity treated as a threat, your traditions dismissed as pagan, and your people stripped of their power and dignity. She watched as all authority, all wealth, all faith, became concentrated in one place, leaving everyone else with nothing. And she decided that this imbalance, this injustice, had to end. But Gudit didn't start with a declaration of war. That's not how you topple an empire that has stood for nearly 1,000 years. She built her rebellion quietly, strategically, like a fire being carefully nurtured from a single spark. She traveled among the dissatisfied, the dispossessed, the forgotten. She found common ground with other communities that had been pushed aside by Aksum's relentless expansion. She didn't just offer them vague promises of a better future. She gave them a target for their anger. She united them under a single, powerful idea. The system that oppressed them was not invincible. She gathered warriors who had nothing left to lose, men and women who had seen their families suffer and their culture decay. She transformed their raw anger into a disciplined, motivated fighting force. Her movement wasn't just about conquering new lands for personal gain. It was far more primal than that. It was about revenge. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming a sense of identity that had been stolen from them. While the Aksumite kings were busy with court politics and religious rituals, Gudit was building an army in the shadows, fueled by a collective rage that had been ignored for far too long. When Gudit finally decided to strike, the Aksumite Empire was caught completely off guard, not because its armies were weak or its defenses were down, but because the empire had become arrogant. It believed itself untouchable, divinely protected, and eternal. Its rulers could not even conceive of a threat emerging from the very people they had dismissed as insignificant. And that was their fatal mistake. Gudit's forces swept through the highlands like a storm. They were fast, they were brutal, and they were single-minded in their mission. Cities that had stood for centuries fell. The symbols of Aksumite power, the grand churches, the monasteries, the royal palaces were targeted. Royal authority, which had seemed so absolute just a few years earlier, completely collapsed. The empire that had once dominated the Horn of Africa began to crumble, not from an external invasion, but from within. It was a testament to Gudit's strategic genius. She didn't just attack the empire's armies, she attacked its very idea of itself. She dismantled its symbols of power, ensuring that the old order couldn't simply regroup and return. Now, it's important to understand that Gudit didn't rule gently. She ruled decisively. Her goal was not to reform the Aksumite system, but to eradicate it completely. She understood that for her people to be free, the old power structure had to be so thoroughly broken that it could never return in the same form. She ruled with an iron will, removing the old elites and ensuring that the source of her people's oppression was gone for good. And that is precisely why later history feared her so much. She didn't just defeat an army, she upended an entire world order. Her rebellion changed the course of Ethiopian history forever. The great Aksumite Empire, one of the most significant powers of the ancient world, was shattered. Power shifted away from the old northern heartlands to new regions. A new era, known as the Zag dynasty, would eventually rise from the ashes, itself founded by the Agia people from whom Gudit likely came. But this transition was not peaceful. With the collapse of the central authority came chaos. The intricate trade networks that had brought wealth to Axum broke down. Stability vanished. The land suffered from years of warfare, and so did Gudit's own legacy. Because history is almost always written by the victors, or at least by those who survive the power shifts. The rulers who came after Gudit, seeking to re-establish a Christian kingdom and connect themselves to the old Axumite glory, needed a villain for their national story. And Gudit was the perfect candidate. They wrote her out of history as a legitimate political figure and recast her as a monster. They called her Gudit the Destroyer, a heretical, demonic woman ruled by pure rage, who burned churches and laid waste to a holy kingdom for no reason other than malice. They turned her rebellion into a simple act of senseless destruction. But what they conveniently left out of their chronicles was this: empires rarely fall because of a single person. They fall because they become rigid, corrupt, and refuse to change. They fall because they create the conditions for their own destruction. Gudit didn't create the injustice and inequality in the Axumite Empire. She was a product of it. She simply exposed the deep cracks that were already there. Her legacy is complicated because she wasn't remembered for what she built, but for what she brought to an end. And in the eyes of those who cling to the old ways, nothing is more dangerous than an ending. Queen Gudit's story proves an uncomfortable but timeless truth. When a system silences, oppresses, and ignores too many people for too long, rebellion doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. She wasn't just a destroyer, she was a force of historical change. She didn't just burn an empire. She forced history itself to move forward, away from a past that was no longer sustainable. She remains a powerful, controversial, and absolutely essential figure in understanding the story of Ethiopia and the nature of power itself. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more hidden figures from history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to hear from you. Comment below with your favorite topic or historical figure you want me to cover next. Your support is what helps bring these forgotten queens, rebels, and heroes back to life. Thanks for watching.